task that has been assigned to me is to debate for the usefulness of subtotal cholecystectomy in the setting of severe acute cholecystitis. I have no disclosures as far as this particular talk is concerned. And what I hope to do in the next 12 to 15 minutes is touch upon this agenda. We will first look at acute cholecystitis as a risk factor for bile duct injury, which is the most dreaded complication of laparoscopic cholecystectomy. We will put forth a conceptual roadmap of 3 steps to avoiding bile duct injuries. What are the 3 most important tenets in avoiding bile duct injuries during cholecystectomy, particularly when undertaken for acute cholecystitis? We will briefly look at the history and the types of subtotal cholecystectomy, and then we will go on to look at the evidence and the guidelines which today very strongly favor the use of subtotal cholecystectomy in appropriate settings. So we all know that acute cholecystitis does increase the risk of of bile duct injury. By how much, it has never really been calculated or predicted, but this was a paper from the World Journal of Surgery in 2015, which was a population based case control studies. And as you can see from the chart, from the table, you can see that when you have a moderate Tokyo type 2 acute cholecystitis, the risk of bile duct injury, the odds ratio of a bile duct injury is 2.41. That means there is a 2.4 times higher risk of a bile duct injury. The worrying thing is when you have a severe acute cholecystitis, a Tokyo type 3, that risk exponentially goes up to eightfold. Now, a eightfold increase in bile duct injury during a laparoscopic cholecystectomy cannot simply be accepted. And we have to figure out a way for mitigating this risk. In other words, a surgeon has to, at all costs, protect the bile ducts from getting injured. This was an excellent paper published recently by Professor Steven Strasberg, who has written quite a lot on the subject of safe cholecystectomy and bile duct injury. And in this paper, which was in fact an invited review, he puts forth a 3-step conceptual roadmap for avoiding bile duct injury during cholecystectomy. So the first step, which is something that we all as surgeons performing this operation familiar with, which is establishing the critical view of safety, the components of which I'm going to not reiterate here, but it involves secure anatomic identification before any structure is clipped or divided. The second step is what he calls the inflection point during the surgery or the turning point of the surgery. For any reasons, if the surgeon feels that he is approaching a point of danger, he should know when to stop and then take appropriate steps in order to avoid injuring the bile duct. And the third step is the uh, maneuvers which are performed after he has clearly identified that the inflection point has been reached. Professor Srikhande, who is one of the pioneers of biliary surgery in this country, once very famously during his talk said that, like a safe mountaineer, a safe surgeon never crosses the point of no return. And that's the whole idea of identifying that point. If you cross that, if you continue a dissection, you're likely to cause bile duct injury, and stop at that point and take certain actions. So, what could those options be? Those are described as bailout procedures. And bailout procedures are the procedures which allow the surgeon to complete the operation safely. And again, here there are 3 scenarios. One is that after a preliminary laparoscopic examination of the liver and the hepatocystic area, you cannot simply find the gallbladder, which is extremely, extremely rare. But this happens when the gallbladder is so shrunken that it is practically impossible to find it. At this point in time, the surgeon has to make a calculated decision as to whether it is safe for him to convert the operation, and does he have facilities like, say, an intraoperative ultrasound to try and figure out that small shrunken gallbladder, and the expertise, particularly in open biliary surgery, to perform a cholecystectomy for that gallbladder, which often may be the size of a peanut? Or is it simply better to retreat, document what has been found during the surgery, and refer the patient to a more experienced biliary surgeon? The second option is only fundus can be exposed, and below the fundus there is either a fistula, or there are such severe adhesions and such severe inflammation that proceeding downwards or medially towards the bile duct is fraught with danger. And this is a scenario in which cholecystostomy, after opening the gallbladder, clearing out all the stones, irrigating the gallbladder cavity, a cholecystostomy can be performed and the day can be saved. The third option is when the surgeon is able to reach the hepatocystic triangle, but fails to achieve a critical view of safety even after a preliminary trial dissection. And this is the situation which calls for two things. One is either pursuing the operation laparoscopically and performing a subtotal cholecystectomy, or converting and performing a subtotal cholecystectomy. When we think in terms of subtotal cholecystectomy, there is often a confusion in the name. Should it be correctly called a partial cholecystectomy, or a subtotal cholecystectomy is a more appropriate name? The term partial usually indicates that you are removing only part of an organ, whereas subtotal has the connotation that you are making an effort to remove as much of an organ as possible. And that's why in the context of cholecystectomy, which is a near total or a subtotal cholecystectomy, the latter name is or seems more appropriate. It is interesting that after the first open cholecystectomy was performed in 1882 by Langenberg, there were reports, some early reports of surgeons having to resort to a method which did not involve a complete cholecystectomy. In fact, way back in 1893 or 1894, the surgeon who described the T-tube, Kerr, actually has documented the use of a subtotal cholecystectomy. But the first paper which was published on the subject is this one in the American Journal of Surgery in 1938, where the surgeon, he is depicted as beautifully, he has opened the gallbladder, emptied out the stones, and simply kept the gallbladder mouth open with some Penrose drains in that to drain out the area. It is interesting that in the discussion, he mentions that the surgeon Estes, had an occasion to reoperate on 4 of these patients. So this is a series of about 16 or 17 patients. And he had the occasion to reoperate on 4 of those patients. And he makes a mention that no vestigial or anything resembling a gallbladder could be found in the gallbladder fossa. So in other words, having re-explored the patient, there was no gallbladder stump or a remnant gallbladder in these patients after performing this operation. The laparoscopic subtotal cholecystectomy gets described in the literature for the first time in 1993, within 7 or 8 years of Eric Muhe performing the first laparoscopic cholecystectomy in 1985. So this was a series of 6 patients, and the authors mention that this was carried out, a subtotal cholecystectomy was performed in order to reduce the operative time and avoid the excessive bleeding which may have ensued and necessitated a conversion. So the term subtotal cholecystectomy has been around in the literature for a long time. It was this paper, again from Professor Strasberg in the Journal of American College of Surgeons in 2015, which specifies 2 types of cholecystectomy. The first one is called a fenestrating type, in which it is impossible to oversew the gallbladder remnant or a stump, and in which a purse string is taken around the mouth that can be seen within inflamed tissue, the presumed cystic duct leading onto the bile duct, and a drain is kept. And the other one is called the reconstituting type, where you can actually fold a part of the gallbladder, posterior gallbladder wall, and close that stump, or take a running stitch on a cystic duct. This slide documents the advantages and disadvantages of these two types of subtotal cholecystectomy. With the fenestrating type, biliary fistulas are more common as expected, because you're not really making any efforts to close the opening. Most resolve spontaneously, but some may require endoscopic intervention. With the reconstituting type, as expected, bile fistulas are infrequent, but sometimes result in a gallbladder remnant, and a small percentage of these patients go on to require a second operation. And this paper in 2016 indicated that fenestrating type is the preferred method. We will see in some of the recent literature that it has been shown that reconstituting type seems to be the better subtotal cholecystectomy to perform. So this was a comparison of the fenestrating and the reconstituting type of subtotal cholecystectomy, a paper which appeared in Surgical Endoscopy in 2020. 39 studies, 1784 patients, and they documented that the fenestrating type of cholecystectomy, where you essentially leave the mouth of the cystic duct open just with a drain, was associated with higher incidence of retained stones, higher incidence of subhepatic and subdiaphragmatic abscesses, higher incidence of surgical site infections. Need for postoperative ERCP was much higher, and the reoperation rate was higher. A paper which appeared just a couple of months ago in Surgery was a systematic review of almost 85 studies published between 1985 and 2020. Several thousand patients, close to 3,600 patients. And in this series, the authors state that 0.2% or 7 patients sustained a bile duct injury, and about 14% of the patients had a bile leak in the postoperative period, which required intervention in one form or the other. And again, these authors state that the reconstituting type of subtotal cholecystectomy is better. Whenever you can safely close the stump with a running suture, it is a better option than leaving it open simply with a drain. And they also go on to point out that if you opened the patient or converted the case and then performed a subtotal cholecystectomy, that single factor or the combination of an open surgery and a subtotal cholecystectomy was associated with a high 30-day mortality. Now, looking at these figures, one may wonder why the complication rate and the mortality is slightly higher. But this, I think, simply represents the typical pathology that is being studied here. And the severe nature of the pathology or the inflammation is partly responsible for these figures. It is often said whether a conversion in the face of a difficult callous triangle or a frozen callous triangle, or what Professor Strasberg, in one of the classic lectures that he's given on culture of safety in cholecystectomy, calls BIF, or biliary inflammatory fusion, where the Hartmann's pouch is completely fused with the biliary ducts. Whether a conversion is the way to save the day, whether a conversion is the right way to go forward. And it is probably not. This particular guidelines on World Society of Emergency Surgery guidelines on diagnosis and treatment of acute cholecystitis clearly state that they recommend a laparoscopic or an open subtotal cholecystectomy in situations in which the anatomic identification is difficult and in which the risk of iatrogenic injury is high. The quality of evidence for this recommendation is moderate, and the guidelines are the authors are fairly strong in recommending this particular solution. And they are not wrong. If you look at this paper from 2018, the title itself strikes home the message. the heavy price of conversion from laparoscopic to open operations in emergent cholecystectomies. So this was a analysis of a huge database of nearly 225,000 patients, out of which 4,200 or close to 2% had undergone conversion. And the analysis found that when conversion happened, the costs nearly went up by 259%, or about 2.5 times higher than the hospital cost in a non-converted cholecystectomy. There was a significantly higher mortality of close to 5% as compared to just 0.3% in the non-converted group. Again, a 0.34% mortality in a cholecystitis or a cholecystectomy may seem high, but please remember that this is a group which is often ill, has severe inflammatory changes in the right upper quadrant, probably even sepsis. So 0.34% mortality in this group is to be expected. But by converting the operation to an open, which often is suggested as a solution to this difficult scenario, may not be the right thing to do. So one thing is clear, that the conversion itself cannot be looked upon as a bailout procedure. What the surgeon is able to do, or what the surgeon is capable of doing after converting the operation to an open surgery, is the bailout procedure. So before converting, the surgeon has to always ask himself, am I going to be able to do something more or different that my skills do not allow me to do laparoscopically? And if the answer to that question is an unequivocal no, yes, then it is fair to convert and perform the operation which that surgeon could not have performed laparoscopically. But simply converting and then doing something that could have been done laparoscopically adds tremendously to the patient's mortality and morbidity. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, Chairman Sir, to avoid a bile duct injury, a subtotal cholecystectomy, either laparoscopically or open, depending on the surgeon's level of experience and level of skill, should be strongly considered and performed when a critical view of safety cannot be obtained, particularly in the setting of severe acute cholecystitis. The decision to perform a subtotal cholecystectomy or the reaching of the inflection point really depends on two things. It's the severity of the inflammation and experience of the surgeon. Keep in mind, though, that if you open the case and then perform a subtotal cholecystectomy, it may have a poorer outcome or carry a higher mortality. I hope that most of the those listening to this are convinced about the argument that I have made in favor of subtotal cholecystectomy being a good operation to be carried out in selective cases of severe acute cholecystitis. But for those who are not, I'm going to leave you with the words of a very wise man. Professor Barry Salke from New York has visited us in India quite often. And this was one of his slides that is imprinted on my mind. In that slide, he said, it is always better and safer to do a 95% cholecystectomy than risk a 105% cholecystectomy. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention.